So welcome, friends. Welcome, Lisa, Matt, and Dante to this Truth and Reconciliation dialogue for this year, 2024, where our theme is healing our histories and decolonizing ourselves. And before I hand it over to you, as I know, I'm Nilima Bhatt, I'm the convener of this self-organizing global citizens movement to do truth and reconciliation with our histories, our past. And I want to congratulate you for having published your book, Common Ground. It came out coincidentally at the time of Truth and Reconciliation Week. So I always love these synchronicities. There are no accidents. It's always a sign from a greater intelligence that somehow we're doing the right thing, we're on track when things line up in this way. So with that, over to you for your panel, Dante, Lisa, and Matt, and I'll come back at the end with any questions I may have, or if we have viewers who are asking questions. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nilima. It's our privilege to be here inside this series of interventions on truth and reconciliation work. We feel very honored to be here with our panel. This is a panel by the name of Common Ground, Understanding the Gap that Unites Latin America and the US. And it's been put together precisely by my colleagues, Lisa Kahle-Piasecki and Matthew Bereza. And I am going to turn it over first to Lisa, then to Matthew to introduce themselves, and then myself.
Thank you, Dante. So first, thank you, Nilima, for inviting us to be part of your work here. I know I speak for my colleagues and myself. We feel very honored to have this opportunity to collaborate in this way. And I am an associate professor of management at Heidelberg University in Ohio.
And thank you, Nilima. And good to see everybody here. And I agree, things line up, and it feels good to be able to talk about these data, especially in truth and reconciliation in the Americas. My name is Matt Bereza, and I'm an associate professor of psychology at St. John Fisher University in New York. And I teach liberation psychology, community psychology, and explore the foundations of historical trauma transmission, especially those of us in the Americas, Central America, and also trauma work in the Basque Country of Spain. And I'm very honored to be here today.
And my name is Dante Benito Castro, and I am located in Mexico, and I have a position in the School of Business for Tec de Monterrey as an associate professor as well. And the main focus of both my research and my teaching is on entrepreneurship, especially the social side of entrepreneurship, and also business model innovation. And my work lately has been developed in terms of giving this new face to businesses with some other elements that traditionally they don't have, such as creating better impacts for communities, better impacts for societies as a whole. So we are very glad to be here with this intervention on this series of conversations for truth and reconciliation. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Matt, who is going to introduce a little bit of the agenda.
Yep. So we, three of us, actually four of us, and many others who have worked on the book, wanted to explore, because Lisa and myself have experience working in the Americas and Central America, and also took a group of students to South America and did a little data collection on that experience. And we came up with some ideas about a book that will talk about who we are as Americans, and not just in the northern sense, often you'll hear somebody in the North say, I'm an American, and they're talking about Iowa or Idaho or New York or Florida. But when Lisa and I were teaching I remember being in Quito, in Ecuador, and somebody said, pues yo soy americano, I'm an American. And that really stuck with me. I remember thinking, it is actually American is in the title of all of us, South America, Central and North. And so we wanted to ask in this book what this idea of America is, and what things keep us apart, what things bring us together, and how we protect both of those. Why do we protect things that separate us? Why do we protect things that bring us together? And what are those things? And so the book overviews everything from business practices, gender relations, trauma and transmission, otherness, food practices, and at the heart of it asks why we're here and where we're going, and what makes us American. And so in this recording, at least, we'll talk about a series of those themes as we go through, but the chapters are varied, touching many different aspects of our lives. So anyway, a little overview of our book, and I'm excited to get into it.
Well, having said that, by Matt, we are gonna go through the agenda real quick. Matt already outlined the key themes that our Common Ground book addresses. And in this session, we are gonna go through cultural similarities and differences. And we are going to focus on one particular cultural dimension that we wanted to share with you. From there, we will have 10 strategic proposals and challenges for both Mexico and the United States. At this stage, we could focus on these countries, but that doesn't mean that our book does not cover other aspects for other countries in Latin America. And eventually, we would like to continue talking about other countries in this Western Hemispheric region. From there, right after we finish with these proposals and being commented by both Lisa and Matt, we will open it for discussion and a conclusion. So if we move on to the next slide, as I was saying, we are going to be focusing on this particular dimension created by the work of Gerd Hofstede, and by the name of the masculinity index that he created a long time ago. So we are pinpointing right here that both the US and Mexico, of course, they have a index value in this masculinity index. Mexico ranks higher than the US in terms of masculinity index, but that doesn't mean that either country has different challenges. We believe that those challenges might be actually shared. So in terms of some differences between more masculine, more feminine societies, we can see that femininity tends to have a better balance between family and work, sympathy for the weak, women elected in political positions, mothers decide on number of children, and religion focuses on fellow human beings. That's when you talk about femininity as the prevailing culture in a given society, whereas in terms of masculinity, or when countries tend to have more of a masculinity culture, work prevails over family, admiration is for strong people or strong figures, few women in elected political positions, fathers decide on family size, and religion focuses on God or God or gods. So this is in general what the masculine, feminine dimension created by Gerd Hofstede speaks about. So if we move on to the next slide, I will show you that based on this masculinity, femininity, cultural dimension, we as a group of colleagues decided on constructing for this panel a selection of 10 challenges that we as countries share. This is not a part of the book. This is derived from what we are exposing in the book. In other words, these challenges are not mentioned in the book. These challenges are exclusively for the purpose of this panel. So the 10 challenges that we are going to be talking about go by gender equality in the workplace, work-life balance, emotional expression, cooperative learning, domestic violence, LGBTQ plus rights and acceptance, mental health awareness, paternal involvement, redefining success, and conflict resolution. So we are about to enter each one of these 10 challenges, commented both by Lisa and Matt, and that's how we are gonna be moving on through this session. So if we go right ahead to the first one in next slide, we will start by addressing gender equality in the workplace. As a truth and reconciliation work, or we can mention this, some work to do, we would like to propose to bridge the gap in leadership positions and pay disparities between men and women. That this is a common challenge for both the US and Mexico, and of course other countries. What are our proposals here? Our proposals as a common ground authors would be to implement blind recruitment processes to reduce unconscious bias, and establish mentorship programs specifically for women in leadership roles. That doesn't mean that this is all we have to do. This is just a couple of proposals in this first number that we are showing here. As country specific, we would propose that Mexico focus on enforcing existing laws like the federal labor law, among other things. And in the case of the US, it could be that emphasizing pay transparency legislation and strengthening the Equal Employment Opportunity Commissions and foreign powers might work. And from here, Lisa, you wanna talk about a little bit more on this first one?
So for those who might be listening who are unaware of the United States federal employment law, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is responsible for enforcing the federal laws, which make it illegal to discriminate on multiple categories, and one of those is gender. Now, even though it is illegal to discriminate on gender, for example, in higher education in the United States, female professors make 82 cents for every dollar that male professors make. And this is based on data from 2023. And then in terms of tenure track positions, women are only 44% of of professors in tenure track positions in the United States, and only 36% of full professors. So the gender inequality and pay disparity is really apparent in higher education, and other industries have similar findings. So even though we have these federal laws, we could see that the pay disparity is really great in the United States. And Matt, I don't know if you'd like to add something as well.
And so a couple of areas of my investigation come off of this, especially what Lisa has just referenced, with LGBTQ plus populations, and also what many people refer to as disability studies, or otherness in the Americas. Now, we don't even have data on LGBT plus populations as far as equity in the workplace, because still in many places in the Americas, being out is dangerous or illegal. And so data collection of those populations could be detrimental, could be deadly. So we, of course, don't push in any direction that science will do harm, but we have no idea about equity as far as LGBT folks in the Americas. We'll talk a little bit in a different slide on here in the North, but as far as people in the culture of disability, several several people or several different theories govern these challenges that we see for equality in the workplace. Disability studies is focusing on something called crip theory and queer theory to highlight and amplify voices who say, you know, actually, we are, all of us, temporarily able-bodied, and our natural state is not able-bodied. Babies are not able-bodied. Retirees are not able-bodied. Many times in our lives, we become not able-bodied. And they say, actually, we believe the state of humanity is much closer to not able-bodied all the time. And that we need to move beyond this idea that there is a boss, there is a job, there's a production, and there's an outcome. Anyway, crip theory and queer theory and able-bodiedness is just one of the new areas in gender equality in the workplace we see.
Very good. We can move on then, if you will, Lisa. And this comes also as some of the comments that Lisa has had in the past when we discussed these topics. Having herself being an expat at some point. Would you like to add a little bit on this, Lisa?
One of the things that we hope our book will be a resource for is for industry professionals and for those companies that have cross-border operations. And in that situation, employees have an opportunity sometimes to go and live abroad. And we hope that we can provide some foundation for encouraging collaboration. In terms of expat can mean a lot of different things in terms of that person's expat experience. But as I was sharing with Dante and Matt, my experience as a female was quite interesting. And I want to point to Shakti leadership for a moment, and I resonated with the book in a lot of ways. When I had the opportunity to go abroad for a while to teach, many of my colleagues at the time said, well, you can't do that. You're married, you have a family. You can't do that. Why would you do that? And so those limiting comments really made me doubt in some ways being very excited about the opportunity to go abroad. And had I listened to those comments, I think I certainly wouldn't have met Dante. And so the work has evolved because of those relationships. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how I brought it into the classroom. But I think a lot of times maybe companies don't spend enough time and resources training their employees who are going to go abroad. And so we focus so much on the differences, which are important to consider, but we should also be focusing on our similarities as people in order to build those relationships and friendships. And I don't know if Matt or Dante, you want to add anything else to that?
No, I think I'm all set.
Yeah, I think I will eventually, Lisa. We can move on if you want. We'll start addressing the second one of the topics that we wanted to put on the table this afternoon. It's about work-life balance. And from the Truth and Reconciliation work, we believe that we could propose shifting from a performance-oriented culture to one that values quality of life and family time. As proposals from our common ground perspective could be introducing flexible working hours and remote work options, even more than the actual efforts, the current efforts or actual efforts that companies or organizations are putting on the table. Develop company policies that discourage overtime and promote vacation time use. In terms of specific strategic challenges, Mexico could gradually introduce flexible work policies, starting with larger companies and multinational corporations. And in the US, we consider that we could push for federal paid family legislation building on existing state-level programs. I don't know if, Lisa, you want to share something on that?
Yeah, so a lot of people may be surprised to know that in the United States, maternity leave for females or for the males is left up to the states. There is no federal law guaranteeing maternity leave. We do have the Family and Medical Leave Act that allows for 12 weeks of unpaid leave in the case of a birth, but 12% of women who work in the private sector in the United States only have access, only 12% to paid maternity leave. And 25% of women in the US go back to work 2 weeks after giving birth.
Yeah.
So this is very shocking to other people from other countries. Matt?
Sorry. Yeah, and also one of our chapters in the book that I worked on was food service in agriculture, food production in the Americas. And just as Lisa is talking about, and Dante are talking about, we have a lot of practices I think people would be very surprised about in developed countries. One of the most egregious fields for lack of flexible work hours or compensation for work-life balance is in agriculture and food production, where many of our workers in the North, at least, are not paid per hour. Farm workers' rights are still incredibly weak in the US, and also restaurant workers, where they are one of the few classes besides people who work in the care of other people's homes. Food service workers don't have to be paid minimum wages if they're doing certain jobs in a restaurant. And so this incredibly fragile web of people who grow our food, prepare or transport our food, and serve our food is not vastly unprotected, but significantly unprotected.
I'd like to add that it was surprising for me when I first heard that precisely from Lisa. And Mildred Bereza, she's one of our special contributors to our book, Common Ground. And she has experienced having been educated in Europe. She eventually in this conversation, she was comparing the practices over in Europe in comparison to the ones in the US, in comparison to the ones in Mexico. And they vary a lot. They are surprisingly different. So I believe we still, as societies, we might have work to do on this work-life balance, not just from this perspective of leaves, maternal leaves, for example, but on other sides. Should we move on, Lisa, to our third idea here? It would be about emotional expression. As a truth and reconciliation work, we would like to encourage open expression of emotions and vulnerability, particularly among men. Our common ground strategic proposals would be to incorporate emotional intelligence training in schools and workplaces, or launch public campaigns showcasing diverse expressions of masculinity. As country-specific strategy challenges, Mexico, in the case of Mexico, we could partner with popular media figures to challenge machismo culture and promote emotional openness. And in the case of the US, we were discussing about integrating emotional intelligence into school curricula and corporate training programs. So those are our basic ideas on this emotional expression arena. Lisa, would you like to add a little bit on this?
One of the things that I do is actually train my students in emotional intelligence, particularly when we've done any cross-cultural exercises, so that students have an awareness of basically their emotional intelligence scale, because it's something that can be developed, right, and improved. And so I feel like universities really have an important role here in helping our students develop their emotional intelligence. It is a very popular topic in the training industry in the United States, and particularly within leadership training. And so, certainly there's a lot of work that can be done, but it is beginning to start in the university area as well.
Yeah, and in public education, I still hold a licensure in school psychology and have spent years working in pediatrics. And right now, at least in the United States, we are in an incredibly quantitative focus of psychology. If you can measure it, it exists. Unfortunately, psychology turns an incredible blind eye to things they can't measure, which would be emotional intelligence. And therefore, we have had probably in the last 10 years a great deficit of training in emotional intelligence. Often it's lumped in with spirituality, with new practices from other cultures. But as of right now, the American Psychological Association is deficit in this area. However, there's much more to the Americas than North America. And so we're going to talk about a little bit later, at least in one of our classes at the university, we've started to take a view to the global South to please help us understand more about how to process and how to deal with emotions in the American mentality.
Just to add a final comment on this one, I could relate to this specific strategic challenge that we as country in Mexico have, and I could tell that probably in other countries in Latin America, because of the media figures that prevailed in 40s, 50s, this macho bravado masculine figure that is constantly saving the world, but by violent means or not taking care of others. So I believe that was the prevailing figure in the past, and we still have a challenge to address there. And if this comes with help from the media, the mass media, that could definitely work as it was in the other way around in the past. I believe in the future we could have better opportunities to overcome this type of situations in our societies. Shall we move on to number 4, Lisa, please? Just to introduce this topic, which is cooperative learning. And as a Truth and Reconciliation work, we would propose to move away from competitive educational models towards more collaborative approaches. As common ground strategic, it would be attempting to redesign curriculum to include more group projects and peer-to-peer learning. And also, we could train teachers in facilitating collaborative learning environments. In Mexico, we could move on to piloting cooperative learning methods in urban schools before expanding nationwide. And in the case of the US, leveraging existing educational reform movements to incorporate more collaborative approaches. Lisa, would you like to add something?
I really had some of my students serve as inspiration for me for this project because after my work in Mexico, I've kept up friendships and partnerships and have been able to do many cross-cultural classroom exercises with students in Ohio. And so what some people might not realize, the border states might be more familiar with the Mexican culture, but in Ohio, where we do have a lot of Mexican culture, there's a lack of understanding really about the country. And so through these classroom experiences, it's been really exciting to see the collaboration between US students and Mexican students coming together in projects. So I had to count how many students that I've trained and collaborated with professors in Mexico, and it's really over 400 students. And so one of the, I think, exciting things as a researcher is to kind of capture that qualitative data. And when I read reflection papers from students saying, I had no idea that Mexico had this part of their culture. They maybe only knew it from the beaches. or they know some of the food, but they really didn't understand the individuals. And so through working with emotional intelligence, bringing up this cross-cultural awareness, the students have been very enthusiastic about participating in these type of projects. So in a small way, I hope that I've helped in this area, and there's lots of work to do.
Yeah,
Matt?
and just to piggyback off of that, we at our university, we've been working on what Paulo Freire put forth in Pedagogy of the Oppressed about groups of questioning groups coming together and posing questions about what problem is happening right now in our lives. And that's the thing we're going to learn. And we took our inspiration from that great video. I believe it was in Brazil or Bolivia, where Paulo Freire's ideas were being taken to rural villages, and they were saying, well, what words should we teach people? And everybody was holding an implement to build the village, and they said, oh, well, let's start with that. Let's teach with that presenting problem. And I brought that to so many of my classes, and the problems that they present in class that we learn about are very American problems. Hunger, poverty, and homelessness come up over and over with our students, with our community members, and even with our staff. And so that we start learning about imposing questions and answers immediately in small groups.
Thank you, Matt. Shall we move on to number 5, Lisa? Thank you. Number 5 is on domestic violence. As a truth and reconciliation work, we would be mentioning to address and reduce domestic violence rates, which are often higher in more masculine societies. Our common ground strategic proposals would be to strengthen legal consequences for perpetrators and improve victim protection, implement early education programs on healthy relationships and conflict resolution. In terms of specific strategies, in Mexico, we could strengthen women's shelters and hotlines, especially in rural areas, train law enforcement in handling domestic violence cases. And in the case of the US, we came up with ideas of focusing on early intervention programs and expand support for male survivors of domestic violence. Lisa, would you like to add anything?
I don't think I have anything to add to this. I think I'll turn it over to Matt.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. So the Center for Disease Control and Prevention view intimate partner violence, or IPV, as a serious issue in our society for heteronormative couples, for sure. However, when it comes to LGBT folk, we don't have, again, a lot of solid data on occurrences, because many states in the United States, at least right now, outlaw the practice of collecting data on LGBT folks. And so, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a slide coming up. However, we believe right now nearly half of women in non-heteronormative relationships experience IPV, and one half of non-binary folks, and 1/3 of men. And we believe that these rates are so astronomical, which we're talking about 50% occurrences of intimate partner violence. We believe that those rates are so high because so many people in these groups, so many of us have had to pass by experiencing heteronormative relationships before exiting that false culture for us and into our own culture. And that mixture, we believe, is an incredibly hot and violent culture of coming into heteronormative relationships when we are not that thing, and also exiting them. But again, we're not sure because of how delicate the situation is, at least in the North.
Thank you, Matt. And I'll just add that in the case of Mexico, these rural areas really need more help in comparison to urban areas. And it's urgent that authorities, in the case of these uh, people, and especially females who live in rural areas, get more help in comparison to other means of help that exist for other areas. So shall we move on to number 6, please, Lisa? Number 6 would be based on LGBTQ plus rights and acceptance. And as a truth and reconciliation work, we would show the idea of promoting inclusivity and acceptance of diverse gender identities and sexual orientations. As our common ground strategic proposals, we could mention to enact comprehensive anti-discrimination laws and to integrate LGBTQ plus history and issues into school curricula. In the case of Mexico, we could propose to build on recent Supreme Court rulings to push for nationwide marriage equality and anti-discrimination laws. And in the case of the US, addressing disparities in LGBTQ plus rights between states and push for federal level protections. I believe Matt mentioned before that he would be constructing on some theories on this. Will you, Matt?
Yes, yeah, thank you. So right now, Mexico and the United States, many people say, hey, look, there is equality now with LGBTQ plus folks in Mexico, in the United States, but actually those are court cases that those are marriage equality court cases. They hang in the balance of whoever's on the bench at the time. And as we just saw in the United States, one of the long-standing precedents of Roe versus Wade, which protected reproductive rights in the North, was overturned. And so marriage equality could easily be overturned depending on who's on the bench. And so we don't have laws, at least in the North or in Mexico right now, that protect LGBTQ plus folks. 27 states in the United States have no protection for workers, LGBT workers, and even fewer states have protection for education, housing, and especially credit. And so often you have to have somebody sign for you to establish credit, if you can believe that's actually happening in the West. About 8 million LGBT workers are in the United States alone, and about 4 million, or half of them, are not protected by their government, who pay taxes but are not full citizens. And so this reconciliation work actually is fairly dire when it comes to looking at how do we change from a Supreme Court case to actual laws. And that can be very challenging given the political landscape of Mexico and the US right now.
Thank you, Matt. Lisa, would you like to add or move on? All right. So we'll address our number 7, that comes as mental health awareness. As a truth and reconciliation work, we would like to propose this topic in terms of reducing stigma around mental health issues and promoting seeking help as a sign of strength. As our common ground strategic proposals, we could mention launching nationwide mental health awareness campaigns featuring public figures. That could be very helpful, we believe, and increasing funding for mental health services and make them more accessible. In terms of Mexico, as country-specific strategic challenges, we could propose to integrate mental health services into the existing universal healthcare system. And in the case of the US, focusing on improving insurance coverage for mental health services and reducing provider shortage or potential shortages. Lisa, would you like to add something to these ideas?
Certainly, as a university professor, I saw the effects of COVID on our younger people and everyone. And the universities really, in some cases, have done a really good job of providing free counseling to their students, but there is a shortage of counselors out there. And in some cases, when students maybe return home to wherever they live, they can't find someone near them, or there's a long list or long waiting time. People aren't taking new clients. So really this is kind of bubbled up here because of COVID. It's become more apparent. In the United States, the workplace also plays a role in really being an advocate for people and their mental health. And one of the largest professional organizations that deals with employees and employers is the Society of Human Resource Management. And just this last May, they added a specialty credential to their offerings, an 8-hour training for people to take on recognizing mental health in the workplace, so that people can be maybe a better resource for their colleagues, or at least bring up a better awareness. So things are happening here in the US, but we're still seeing the effects of COVID. I still see the effects as somebody who taught during COVID, taught before, and of course teaching after. It's really impacted today's traditional age college student really, really greatly.
Matt, would you like to add something in terms of loss or on funding?
Yeah, so in 2008, at least, the United States came out of the mental health awareness dark ages and passed what's called the parity laws, that insurance now must cover mental health concerns and cannot be more restrictive in their coverage than a physical concern, and that's including of substance abuse disorders. And so we finally had a law that said mental health exists, is real, and is coverable. And interestingly, one of my inspirations I took from Ciudad Mujer in El Salvador. Ciudad Mujer is, as one of my students described it, is best called sister city, where women come together and LGBTQ folks come together and say, hey, what do we need in our community? Mental health, physical, job readiness, internet connections. And they said, instead of us waiting for somebody else or a law like parity laws, let's say these exist, we're working on them, and these are the problems we're going to put together now. And most importantly, they gave a list of providers for all of those things in Sister City or Ciudad Mujer that do these things. And that was one of my great inspirations when looking at this area of our book.
And I could quickly add, in the case of Mexico, years ago, I mean, not a lot, 5 years ago, if I remember well, there was this new law in terms of addressing mental health. So what I observed at that moment is that corporations started to get ready to address that issue in case authorities would come to those places and conduct interviews to check if individuals would feel their mental health was being addressed or probably having trouble with that. It is sad to see that those practices are there in the paper, but not in reality. So we are still waiting to see the first visits, sort of saying, and if we could say it this way, first consequences, for example, in case something is not being addressed in terms of mental health for individuals. But shall we move on, Lisa, to number 8, please? Number 8 is on paternal involvement. As a truth and reconciliation work, we would like to propose or tell, encouraging fathers to take a more active role in childcare and domestic responsibilities. Our common ground strategic proposals would be in terms of introducing paid paternity leave policies and creating father-specific parenting classes for and support groups, In the case of Mexico, we could propose to start with urban educated populations and gradually expand paternity leave policies. And in the case of the US, pushing for federal paid parental leave policy, building on existing corporate and state level programs. Lisa, would you like to add? Matt, would you like to add anything on this?
I think just quickly that it correlates also with my mention earlier on maternity leave. These are really connected in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, I'm okay on this slide.
All right, maybe just quickly adding that this is also, in terms of paternal involvement, very, very new. It's a very new trend in Mexico, but I believe we are moving on to that as a society. Addressing number 9 would be redefining success. As a truth and reconciliation work, we are proposing shifting from material success and status symbols to a broader definition, including personal fulfillment and relationships. Our common ground strategic proposals would be promoting media content showcasing diverse definitions of success and incorporating well-being and life satisfaction metrics into national progress indicators. In the case of Mexico, we could propose highlighting indigenous perspectives on success and well-being in national dialogues. And in the case of US, it could move on to promoting alternative measures of progress beyond just GDP. I don't know if Lisa, would you like to add something on this?
So I'm currently doing some research with Gen Z, and we don't quite know what they're going to be like in the workplace yet. They're just starting to enter, but I think this is the generation that's really going to demand for their employers that there is more work-life balance and well-being. So I think the millennial generation kind of started the trend, but we're seeing it kind of escalate a little bit more with Gen Z. So there's been some pushes in the United States for 4-day work weeks, for example. Some K through 12 school districts are going to a 4-day work week because they can't find enough teachers. So I think that we're seeing this, that individuals are recognizing that maybe life shouldn't be just about work. There are other things out there, right? And Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah.
I was going to ask from Matt, maybe something about previously discussed on agriculture and food.
Yes, yeah, and on top of that, we still view food and food production as part of the GDP, and that it's a commodity, it's a thing. Soil just holds up wheat until it can be reaped and sold, and that seems antithetical to going forward to being able to feed the world. So one of the areas in my chapter that I talked about, as Dante said, an indigenous perspective is the milpa practice in Chiapas, which is this beautiful practice of, which is a word in nuanced that comes from planting many things in one area, not just because things naturally grow together in one area, because it brings many different people together in one area. And so looking beyond, and also makes plants stronger to put up defenses against things that are right next to them. And it's very interesting what the milpa way of farming has taught many of us about what it means to have people we don't like near us. Well, they're still human. We have to have them near us, and we are maybe stronger because of it. So it's just one indigenous technology I think we should highlight. Thank
you, Matt. Shall we move on to the final one, Lisa, which is on the idea of conflict resolution? As a truth and reconciliation work, we would address this as moving from confrontational approaches to more consensus-based and diplomatic problem-solving methods. Our common ground strategic proposals would deal with introducing mediation and conflict resolution training in schools and workplaces, and also establishing community-based conflict resolution centers. In terms of specificity for Mexico, we could propose to incorporate conflict resolution techniques into community policing initiatives, and in the case of the US, expanding restorative justice programs in schools and the criminal justice system. I believe both Lisa and Matt had something to add to this one. Lisa, in terms of leadership or workplace training.
Yeah, I just would like to mention that this is also a very popular topic in the United States for leaders and leadership training, and not so much really at the university level. You can see sometimes courses on negotiation, but I think there's some work we could do at the university level. But in terms of the workforce, there's a lot of training opportunities here.
Yeah, and also in schools we've been using, and I've practiced in city school districts in New York and in Ohio, and we've been using peace circles, which again is another native or indigenous technology where we learn how to speak what we speak our truth, but also to listen and discern when other people are speaking, and realize that speaking is power, and waiting is an incredibly effective communication tool. And one interesting thing that we always talk about in peace circles is the acronym WAIT, W-A-I-T, and that stands for why am I talking? And so often, if we can just wait for a little bit and listen and realize that other people are here and other people are equal. And so peace circles have kind of started to take a little bit of hold in some of our schools.
Just to add a final comment on this final idea on conflict resolution, I have to mention that some colleagues of mine at Tec de Monterrey are starting to develop these reconciliation circles precisely taught by Nilima. So I have to mention this because they are so powerful, and having been there with Nilima, listening to Nilima, how she conducts the circles, it's just wonderful and powerful and liberating. Thank you for these 10 initial points. Thank you for listening for these initial points. We're going to move on to practical implications and final minutes for probably a brief discussion. Lisa, would you like to start?
Well, I think we're hoping that our book certainly will be useful to educators who have a course or teaching about our topics or the countries, but also for the industry professionals who maybe are in the United States and also going to Mexico to work, or vice versa. We also hope that it'll be of use for just individuals who want to know a little bit more about both countries. And we really did take approach for collaboration, building relationships, and we explore it in a lot of different ways in the chapters.
Matt?
Yeah, thank you. So we are just coming up on time, but we still have several minutes left. If anybody does have a reflection, a question, or a discussion point of any kind, we'd be happy to address those.
Just as a final comment, in terms of practical implications, I will have to stick to very much to what Lisa just mentioned. I had the opportunity to be in the US a couple of weeks ago, and I was so surprised on some conversations that I was having, and I was mentioning the upcoming book, and people from different areas. I remember one of these persons being from the banking industry, and he was immediately caught in terms of interest by this conversation, and he wanted to know more. And he was like, yeah, "Okay, but what is the book about?" Well, the book would help people who want to establish a commercial relationship or a cultural relationship and know nothing about culture in this case in Mexico or vice versa. And he was so surprised about the potential implications for himself, he mentioned, and for other colleagues. That was very, very revealing. Nilima, please, you wanted to add something and we can start with these final moments in terms of discussion.
Yeah, so thank you so much. That was very, very insightful. Thank you for collecting the points into these 10 areas of intervention that would benefit, and like these levers that could have a larger impact. And one thing I realized, I understood when you mean the differences that unite us is like regardless of the culture or the history of the US, Canada, and Mexico, humans are humans and everyone faces human problems. And that could be gender, that could be social, inequality, which is, just financial disparities and so on. So it was a very nice way of understanding that people are people, humans are humans, they have the same problems regardless of histories. On the other side, since I just came from Chiapas last week, I spent the whole week there at the Center for Social Innovation that Tech has. This is very front and center for me, the concept of identity, right? That you have the indigenous identities, and then over time, with colonization, those have got traumatized or blurred or lost, right? So in fact, I was looking at your items, it goes from 3 to 5 to 7 to 9. I've made note of your points. When you're talking emotional expression, I wanted to know, since Matt works in this space, the psychology of it, right? That how do we heal the trauma that our identities have suffered and are playing a role, therefore, in our emotional expression? Our emotional expressions are trauma impacted, and the impact that came to our identity because of the colonization and what happened here, right? Then when you talk about domestic violence, it's interesting, on one hand, we say, what was success mean? It would mean looking at more indigenous perspectives and, living with more well-being in our life and living more aligned with nature. Interestingly, there is a lot of gender violence in the indigenous communities, which was a surprise to me. But then I thought about it, it should not be a surprise, because if these communities have been traumatized, then the wound expresses as violence, right? So these are so many subtle, nuanced layers that I just want to table here. So mental health awareness as well has to take into account trauma-impacted identity and how that is adding yet another layer to the mental health problems of the communities. So yeah, it's, I think for me, the underlying piece in all this is how our identities are also playing a role in the conflicts that are happening, the unresolved issues that are sitting in the space, what's coming in the way of finding that common ground is the identity that has been traumatized because of colonization. So I was also curious to hear from you as you go forward with your book, how can you also include the idea of healing collective trauma around our identities? So that decolonization work, right, of decolonizing. So how do we get away from being Eurocentric, even in our examination and articulation of the issues, right? Are we checking, are we coming from a Eurocentric lens, or are we coming truly from a decolonized lens of our reality here today? Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's so much wound sitting there. And when you see what the Zapatistas tried to do, it's like when the NAFTA was announced, like suddenly an entire 10-15% of Mexico's population doesn't have the land that they were entitled to as part of the Constitution, right? And now they're displaced. And how they've tried to create their own self-governing society as a result of what happened between countries making trade agreements, right? So there is so much in these Americas that I feel if it can be healed and true common ground can be found, I think it'll become a model for the world, because the world hasn't got over the age of colonization and Eurocentrism. So I just thought these are some thoughts bubbling up for me as I heard you.
Thank you very much, because we at the end of our experience together, all of us, we were talking and we thought, I remember one conversation with Lisa and Dante, we were like, we need to look at this from the LGBT perspective, or the woman's perspective, or the more of the global South perspective. And so we immediately started writing half of the second edition, which is of course going to have to include trauma and trauma work. And to me, working in the Americas, trauma and addressing trauma has to involve time plus a new way, a new way of beneficence, and it's going to have to take a long time. And the American idea that things happen like that can't work on trauma. It has to sink into our bones. But we did. We had this conversation and we thought, oh boy, we have a lot we have to put in addition to.
Adding to that and celebrating those conversations, because they have been so enriching, both with Matt and Lisa, in putting together not just the book, but also this panel. And trying to address your comment or question or proposal, Nilima, I believe it's a matter of giving a first step. And I truly believe that this is one of those first steps, addressing the issue, being open, talking about it without the typical fear that, for example, I was inflicted in my own childhood. Like when you would talk about some certain things related to these issues, and then both your grandparents or even your parents would come and say, you don't want to talk about that. And then, but that is a couple of generations ago. In terms of time, it's not a long time ago. And you do not address this, you do not address that. This is one of the things that we are addressing openly. And actually, I would say this would be one of those things that probably my grandparents would tell, oh, you don't want to talk about that. Things are just the way they are, and you should be happy about that. And it's time to say, hey, maybe happiness is not the way they described to me in this case. And maybe happiness is giving these first steps, addressing the different issues that haven't been addressed the way they probably should have. And from there, it's like dreaming of giving the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth step towards that. It's been hundreds of years since 1492. And at some points it was a first step back then. Why couldn't we start with our first steps? That would be my comment. Lisa, would you like to address something as a final idea into this discussion, or just wrap it up as you will?
I think I just want to thank you again for having us here. I know we've been looking forward to this, and we were excited to be able to share our work with you and your organization, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And where can people find your book?
This is what the book looks like, and it is available through Kendall Hunt Publishing, and I can provide a link for the book I could put it in the chat, or if it's easier, just to send it to you, whichever way you prefer.
Yes, please send it to me, and then we will put it up with the recording on YouTube so people can find it with the recording.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nalima.
So
Thank you,
all,
Nalima.
yeah, all the very best. I really appreciate your time for offering a session for our Truth and Reconciliation dialogues. And if the Americas can reconcile and find common ground, it has a huge it'll have a huge impact on the rest of the world. So this is very important work, and I'm so grateful to the three of you for putting it together.
Thank you, Nalima. And
Thank
thank you,
you.
Dante and Lisa.
Thank you, Nilima. Thank you,
Thank-
Lisa. Thank you, Matt.
Bye-bye now.